What is the spookiest, most paranormal thing you have ever witnessed while driving? My two friends and I had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana at around 2 o'clock a.m. one night in my Ford van, approximately 50 miles outside of Laredo. There is a very lengthy and dim stretch of highway with no towns, buildings, or lights. I was in the right lane when a truck approached and shifted into the left passing lane. In my peripheral vision, I noticed a large truck suddenly move toward the right shoulder as I was gradually passing it. I noticed that the truck was swerving to avoid colliding with a person crossing the highway, wearing all white, with their arms folded across their chest and their eyes closed. I swerved to the left, and we were in rural Maine searching for a lumber mill just before sunset, and it took hours to get there because Maine is full of winding, narrow roads. I can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed when I almost hit this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror. That aim is to approach every building in every village from US 1 to Canada as closely as possible. So I pull in as the last guy is leaving, ask him where to park, and tell him I'll see him in the morning. I park my truck in this rather sizable gravel lot with dense forest on all sides, and the only artificial lights visible are those on my truck and my flashlight. Once I've parked, I go sit outside in a lawn chair and take in the wonderful night sky. It was a rare opportunity to see the stars without any light pollution. It sounds like a switch was flipped and 50 coyotes 60 feet away start howling like crazy. I'm not sure what that means. The town of West Salem, Wisconsin, has always given me the chills. It's like it's both alive and empty at the same time, nothing tangible. Just a feeling that something isn't quite right there. As a stand-up comedian, I frequently refer to we hadn't seen a car for a long time, and it was 2 a.m. when I noticed a car stopped on the side of the highway close to the north end of mainland Michigan, where I work as a truck driver with a sense of humor. When we passed the car, the lights turned on, and it returned to the road at an odd time. Then, as it was closing in on us, I encouraged my friend to speed up, which he did, and the automobile continued too. This guy was catching up to us as we were closing in, so we took the exit with the hotel. It was well lit, and we could see the front desk employee. The car exited the building, drove into the hotel parking lot, and then turned around and returned to the highway. I'll never know what that guy was up to, wanted from us, and I don't mind if that stays a secret. This is my father's story, and he was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 1970s rather than a long-haul trucker. I doubt I would be here if it weren't for a certain long-haul trucker. The gas station was open around the clock, and my dad was the only one working the night shift, 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock. I believe a man enters and gives him the creeps. He was dressed in tight pants and jackets, and it was obvious that he had something in his pants underneath the jacket. Since it was summer and warm, why was he wearing a jacket? In the first place, it was later determined that he was high on drugs, in addition to having a large lot where truckers could park, sleep, or take a break. The station was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway, so drivers used it. On this particular night, it was just my dad, a sketchy guy, and one trucker whom he kind of knew because he came in often enough to ask if he would stay in. The cool trucker guy hung out with my dad for a little while longer before another couple of guys arrived to use the booths. They had to eat a sandwich, however, after a few minutes of sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter while examining the stock shelves. The sketchy guy finally looked irritated and got into his blue car and drove off. I should also mention that this was in the 1970s, in the middle of nowhere, in the rural southeast of the United States. My dad only had a landline in the store, and he had no weapons or protection of any kind. As the hours went by, my dad had recovered from his paranoia, but suddenly this guy in a car pulled us into the lot, jumped out, and disappeared. He ran into the store and yelled, "I need a phone." He didn't have a CB, and he didn't see one at the other station. Being unfamiliar with the area, he called 911 as soon as he arrived at my dad's station to report that he had entered a gas station 40 meters away from the next closest station, where he discovered the attendant was shot and dead, and no one else was there. And the only other detail is that when the trucker pulled in, A blue car was speeding out of the lot. It seems that they eventually caught the driver of the blue car, and my dad confirms that it was a dubious man from earlier in the evening. They charge him with murder and armed robbery. I'm editing this a few months later, but I recently spoke with my dad, and he cleared up a few things, so anything. The guy in the blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation, or something. Thank you, my dad, and I hope you're keeping it real. It's not much, but the reason he didn't shoot your dad is edited in bold above. The trucker was there, of course, but it seems simple enough to kill two people if necessary. Did you ever figure out the creep's motivation? Did the trucker have a defense weapon of some kind? I'm not positive, but I'm assuming the creepy guy didn't want a one-on-one situation. Perhaps the cool trucker guy was a powerful figure, but I've never asked what he looked like. My dad, on the other hand, was not, as he was a skinny teenager with a puffed-up fro who looked like a Q-tip. What happened? I guess she hit the fan at another gas station. Perhaps the other attendant was defending himself. My father didn't have any firearms, but I assume some of the attendants had. I was traveling close to Las Vegas at around 3 in the morning. A couple of black SUVs with single-digit Nevada license plates that read 1,2,3 had been following me on the highway for almost an hour when they all abruptly drove off onto a gravel lane. Since there was no cactus or mile sign to identify a path, there was just dirt. When they pulled off the road, everyone turned off their lights, so I left. There was an eerie. I'm not a long-haul trucker, but I thought this would work here as well on a mobile, so I apologize for the format, Mom and Sister. And I was traveling to a baseball game in northern New York during my junior year of high school. The spring got a little chilly at times, and the main road we took, which was about 35 miles long and was only lined with cornfields and trees, became extremely foggy for no apparent reason. My mother then slowed down to a reasonable speed. We eventually came to the end of the fog, and we all turned to look to the left to see that, about 50 yards from the road, a man and woman wearing what looked to be wet clothes from at least a century ago were walking towards the we went past the wood line, and I can still remember the silence in the van until my mother asked, "What the F was that?" Even now, anytime we are together and one of us shares a story, we all get chills. It's the creepiest. At 30 minutes past the hour, I would see what appeared to be animal faces in Arkansas, emerging from the bushes, but a closer look revealed nothing. The highway had just been paved, and there was very little traffic. I was exhausted, and it was paranormal, I suppose, because my route passed close to an Indiana Air Reserve base, so you'd see, round to AM. Planes and helicopters are frequently seen. I spotted a brilliant light as I was about to pick up another load. It was too low to be an airplane, and the green light in the corner of my windshield moved slowly before darting away and disappearing behind some trees. I saw a UFO, but I still believe it was either a jet or a helicopter that turned at the perfect angle after takeoff, and the jet pilots broke the jet flying abnormally isn't necessarily out of the question. It's just crazy. In the winter in Ohio, I saw a small car, like a Cobalt or something, get on the on-ramp to merge into 75 North and lose control. I've heard the sound barrier over town a couple of times in the past, due to sonic boom, before merging into traffic. As if it were nothing out of the ordinary, they turned sideways, plummeted at least 6 feet off the ramp, and landed on all 4 wheels after spinning 360 degrees. The CB radio was going crazy for approximately 5 minutes. Who else observed that? It was around 4 a.m. in Arizona, and I was 23 years old when my newlywed husband and I decided that driving a team would be a wonderful adventure after graduation. Instead of starting a 9-to-5 job, I never switched off my Citizen band when a guy drove up beside me and waved it. His nonsense was annoying, so I turned it on, and he informed me that I had a blown tire. I thanked him and assumed I would stop at the next truck stop. Continued nagging me to stop and check my tire for at least 40 miles. When I finally reached the next town, a pilot truck pulled over, got out, and checked my truck. I had no idea what the guy would have done to me, but I'm glad I followed my instincts and didn't stop. It's not paranormal, but I have many stories from my time traveling as a young woman. When someone says something like that to me, I immediately stop. It's a little different in one of those trucks where you have 18 wheels and you can go, with one flat or blown tire that has been missing for a while. In your car, you'd notice that although there was an immediate problem, you should always follow your instincts and keep going until you reach a well-lit, populated area. This is not a trucker but the black dog is a common sight for many truckers who spend late nights on the road. The dog usually appears as the driver is beginning to fall asleep and is frequently a sign of. There have been numerous reports of truckers seeing the dog and being brought back to reality by the sudden rush of adrenaline. But there have also been a few instances where a trucker swerved to avoid the dog, which resulted in a crash. A few months ago, after a concert, I was driving late at night across the state for about an hour when I felt my eyes. I was driving through an underpass when I noticed a flash of black out of the corner of my eye, but I dismissed it as nothing. When it happened later on the left side of the road, right in front of my headlights, I had read about the black dog before and knew I should soon. Sleeping at the wheel is serious business. I've had my uncle doze off for 15 miles and wake up 8 miles past his exit when he finally ran over the rumble strips. The highway is not straight, and I experienced the same thing when I was working overnight. Not a long-haul trucker, but once in the middle of nowhere, no buildings. SLC cars for miles in rural Canada at 3 a.m., suddenly waking up in my parking space at home and getting into my car to go home terrified the devil out of me. Someone stepped out in front of my truck, began flailing his arms and shining a flashlight at me, and I swerved hard, continued driving, and called the police. Around 5 minutes later, I hope he was okay, but that's not how you should get yourself picked up. Same road, different trip. I nearly ran over an owl at around the same time of night. I was driving in upstate New York in early spring during deer season, and there were not only deer everywhere you had to watch out for, but there were also actual pieces of deer scattered everywhere from cars hitting them, then more cars hitting the roadkill, and so on. My father has a number of stories about transporting logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada, but my favorite is about how when driving his pickup through Utah, he claimed that there was a light that kept pace with him out in the desert on a night without a moon. The eeriest was when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from the Curdellen area. On a snowy winter night, he put on chains before going down, and a minute before it vanished and his truck turned off, he stopped, turned it on, and pulled off at the next diner. The diners called it a common occurrence. Steep grade, and claimed that all of his hair stood up on his body, giving him the impression that someone was watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks, he noticed a big figure standing on a 20-foot embankment. As he approached, it leaped down, but in one bound. Its shoulders were as tall as the cap, and it then leaped over to the opposite side of the I went to a boarding school in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, which was about an hour away from Cord. That second story is really strange. At the time, he believed it was a Sasquatch, but now he claims it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to take off the chains until he was far from the mountain. In one of the dorms, there was a shadowy figure 8 feet tall that would stare at you while you slept from the other side of the room. The ceilings weren't very high, and it had a hunch to it, similar to the giant in Big Fish. I was there for 2 years, and by the time the new kids saw it on their first night, everyone knew. And if you were moved to that dorm, then you were forewarned in a light-hearted manner when we were children, and even after 15 or so years. I still get chills when I write that untrue story that a tall employee named Jeff killed himself while he was merely making sure you were asleep. Something's wrong. Jeff messed up out there. I would share more stories, but it's like telling someone you saw a UFO. You might believe them to some extent, but there's always that chance that you probably did. This is a really strange coincidence, though, because when I heard something like that, I thought, let's hear him out, okay? So my first month, and I was in the middle of the room, on a different dorm top bunk. I was napping with my arm dangling off the side. I can't recall what I was dreaming about, but I do remember this clearly, a cat hissing, followed by screaming, and someone biting my finger so hard that it bruised under my nail. I was completely alone in the dorm, and I was sleeping with my arm dangling on my stomach. So it wasn't me. The dormitories were separated by a half wall. So I got up to check what was going on, thinking someone had run over there and was playing tricks on me. Then, alone, I heard a bang on the wall near my bunk, because it happened in the girls' dorm. But they had a little girl who would run through the bathroom screaming and leaving wet footprints. Their dorm was by our little pond, and when we were outside, some girls came out screaming in towels, saying that something had happened. A female staff member went to investigate, and I recall that when she did, she had that half-smile look that said, "I don't know and I can't." She explained it, and she said, "Yeah, there are footprints of a child in there. My great-uncle, who worked as a long-haul truck driver, is adamant about seeing two men once drag a rolled-up carpet out of their car's trunk and dump it into a river. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it's still eerie. It was real last year when my friend, his wife, and a few of their neighbors watched a big car go to the river at the end of their street in Indianapolis and dump a girl's body there at around 2:00 p.m. Bay. Naturally, my friend and another neighbor ran to the river's edge as the car drove off, and he reported that it was unquestionably a girl's body. I wanted to throw up, and I did. Later, I discovered that this girl, Sloman, had been murdered. They had the license plate, but I'm not sure if the perpetrators were ever apprehended. That's why I was in the VMD area and had a lot of work-related sites. From Virginia Beach to downtown Baltimore, after Friday was over, I left for some social events I had planned for the weekend. I spent the weekend with friends in different parts of Virginia before being taken to locations even farther away for the customary weekend fun times. It is now late Sunday, on the night when I had to leave, or I wouldn't be able to go home in time to begin my mercifully late Monday afternoon. I was completely rested, didn't drink, and didn't use drugs on the highway at around 3 in the morning, since there is no one else around and there haven't been any headlights, taillights, or road lamps for the past hour. I'm driving in the left lane in the middle of nowhere, between Roanoke and DC. The car is dark, slightly damp, and foggy. I have music playing, and everything is okay. Then, I happen to glance to the left and see a German shepherd barking at me. From the passenger seat, the car's instruments give out a blue glow, and the dog is facing the window. I give it a good, hard look as well because initially, I'm doing 90 in a 75 because my brain isn't registering the cop car dummy. Then, all of a sudden, I have the moment when the dog, the instruments, and the white Crown Vic light bar all click in my brain. After giving it another close look, I set the brakes. As I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder space left for another car, I see that there is no trace left, so I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the road. I even put on my blinker to start shifting lanes to the right, to pull over because, wait, there isn't a shoulder on the left side of this road. All of my light bars went out in the middle of the highway, and even when I used my portable spot to glance around, I saw nothing, no headlights, tail lights, or engine noises yet I could see for a good distance in both directions. Nothing. My car had excellent visibility and a lot of extra illumination. Plus it was an off-road SUV with the trappings. No one could have pulled a swoop, much less driven that fast on the wet, sloped grass and rocks to my left. You guessed it. A ghost cop and his dog didn't like me driving a moving truck across Nebraska. I'm not a long-haul truck driver, but there's a point where you're traveling at freeway speed, and the scenery doesn't change. It's a really weird feeling, and it seemed to go on for far too long. At one point, I started to stress out, since there's only Nebraska, and the horizon Nebraska is the truth. Nebraska is life. Not a haul trucker. I reasoned that everything else that has happened in my life must have been a hallucination. At around 2 or 3 in the morning, my high school beater and I were driven down this back road. No one was walking or on the roadways after spending time with friends. A 90 turn. And as I'm turning, I see a man standing with his arms at his sides, wearing tattered clothes, standing motionless about 2 feet into the road. It's foggy, and the area is a small protected wetland. At best, I could see 30 to 40 feet. I almost hit him, but he was closer to my pants than anything else. What is causing the misty nights between 1 and 3 a.m.? Behaving strangely. I drove home late at night after spending time with when I arrived at the road leading home. I saw what I thought was a giant dog standing in the middle of the road, right in the middle of the intersection, not wanting to be seen. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was very foggy, but not to the point where you couldn't see what was in front of you. I slowed down to strike it, but it's not a dog. It's a freaking 4'5" big pink fuzzy rocking horse standing erect in the middle of the road. It was so strange that I kind of stopped there to have a look at it. It was unnerving, and I was about to step out to take a look, but I suddenly realized I had a good friend who told me this story. Years ago, he is the stereotypical old big bad trucker, and I have seen some strange things with him. The point was probably to get someone to stop and get out of their car to look at it, move it to rob them, or worse, drive past it, and it was gone in the morning. Driving along the border in South Texas, he never batted an eye, but as he told me this story, he had goosebumps and a worried expression that, for this guy, is roughly the same as a trembling lip and stained pants. I'll tell this story in the first person because he told me it years ago. In the late hours of the night, while I was leaving the house in Central, when I saw something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams, I initially assumed it was roadkill because I was traveling to Laredo to pick up a load in the early morning. Around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I had just returned from a series of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I was traveling on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the middle of nowhere. It is typically the case, but when I get closer, I notice that it's roadkill and that someone is crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking that either this guy was acting ill or he was taking the antlers as a trophy, but as I got closer, I realized that he was eating the deer, removing chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. Pauses in mid-motion at this point, and he looks up at me instead of my truck. He slashes it up, and I notice that it's enormous, brown and covered in hair. I recall thinking, oh, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. And by the time 3 seconds have gone by, I'm standing at a point in the road, and I didn't even consider stopping. Instead, I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I pass it, it's staring at me once more, not at the truck, but at me through the driver's side windshield. He has the intelligence to know that a driver is inside and knows, being tall and hard to see, I can still see his head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete truck design, where the hood protrudes straight from the windshield. As I start to pass him, this thing is enormous, and I remember seeing what appeared to be human intelligence in its eyes. I apologize. It freaks me out. A friend of my cousin who worked as a long-haul truck driver was making a delivery across the country when he came upon a dirt stretch of a rural route that was rarely used. Because of the poor condition of the road, he had to drive slowly, and he noticed another truck slowly approaching from the opposite direction. This is a story worth sharing for the wall of text. Direction, and he notices that the truck is the same as his. Since this isn't very unusual, he didn't give it much thought, but as the other one approached, he acknowledged that they had the same type of truck by honking. The other one responded, and everything was fine until they had to pass each other, very slowly and narrowly. At that point, he turned to face the driver. He told me that he had seen some really strange things, but that was the point at which he decided to cease being in the military. My dad and a friend drove out to grab dinner. One night, halfway through their drive along a dark road, my dad and his friend observed a truck. He is not a truck driver, but every time he tells me this story, it always kind of freaks me out. When my dad and his friend saw a woman walking in a red dress with black hair, they thought it was strange because it didn't seem safe and it wasn't very warm. My dad said that he knew deep down that stopping was a bad idea, so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. They both swear that she doesn't have a face, just a black hole, as if she had been in a wreck and her face had been removed. It scared them both so much that my dad was shocked. When they stopped to eat, they both agreed they saw the same thing and learned that a woman had died in an accident earlier that year. They were discussing it when a stranger informed them that the sightings of the woman were frequent. I am not one of those to believe in the paranormal, but the story is still kind of strange. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, especially on long drives when I'm feeling a little sleepy. I think I first heard it when I asked him if angels were real when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades before I was. My dad has a fairly mathematical brain, so he frequently accepts calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24 hours a day, 36 hours a day, or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. He was born before labor laws regarding limits and breaks were more standard, so I assume things are different now. When we were driving around town, he would frequently ask me questions like, how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour, but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens was crossing the road? He would come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving, just for fun, out of nothing completely ordinary. He was driving alone, meaning he could check his speed using the equation, the odometer mileage markers, the time, etc. One night after a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes were getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and turn up the music thing didn't seem to be doing much to help. It was a rainy night on a fairly windy mountain road with no shoulder to safely pull over on, so he began playing those logic games aloud to stay awake and attentive. He was saying something like, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reached 100 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Before closing his after taking a deep breath, he felt his head do the nod jerk thing that woke him up. He opened his eyes to discover that he was driving directly toward mile marker 158, which would have sent his entire truck plummeting down a random mountain ravine. He managed to safely reroute the course, but it was only a matter of seconds between that reality and the story usually ends with him crying and saying, I don't know if there are angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't wake up and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road traveling at 60 miles per hour, only to wake up right at the edge between life and death. I'm on the road, and this conversation is right up my alley. I'm not a trucker, I'm a rider who has spent the better part of the last 3 years traveling the deadliest stretch of U.S. Highway TX, Highway 45 stalking long. If you had woken up on time, your kids wouldn't be here today, and that feels pretty close to a spiritual. Long comment. Highway 45 in Texas is a dangerous route for haul truck drivers due to the disproportionate number of fatal collisions. But there is a more pernicious issue that goes unnoticed. Serial killers have been operating there with little to no repercussions since at least the 1960s, according to an FBI agent I spoke with. An estimated 90 serial killers are operating the South Highway system at any given time, according to my estimation, and at least 30 of them are killing along the route from the U.S. border with Mexico to British Columbia. Another officer heard those numbers, laughed, and said, those are the PR numbers. I asked him to clarify, and he said, your hundreds of unclaimed bodies, most of them unidentified, have surfaced over the years in Texas alone, and numerous mass graves have been discovered. As an aside, I've visited one of these mass grave sites after reading about it and wanting to know more. The numbers are low. To test a theory, the bodies were discovered in a field near a busy neighborhood, and a few hundred feet from passing cars. The field is located in a shallow land depression, and according to a twisted trick of nature, no sound can escape it. I chose to investigate the field for myself, booking a motel room across from it and taking a walk through it. I was standing in the depression where over a dozen bodies had been found. I could see and hear children playing in the neighborhood across the street, and I was close enough to the road to read the license plates. A car pulled up in a nearby driveway, and I could hear a man and his son talking as they got out. Doors closing and dogs barking as they went inside the house. Began to yell as loudly as I could. As though my life depended on it, I yelled and yelled, but they didn't hear me. If they had, they would have seen me waving my arms, leading the police to believe that the fields are a dumping ground for multiple. And probably I think that the killers chose the field to further torture their victims. What must it have been like to be fighting for your life and see help right there? And no one comes for you. You're invisible anyway. The point is that there are major trucking routes from Texas to Canada, and statistically, they are above average. Since my focus is on Texas, I can only speak to Texas routes. But even though there's a chance that American serial killers are waking up in BC or other parts of the country, my research leads me to believe that at least 5 unidentified suspects are currently operating along those routes. Over the next 5 to 10 years, Canada will see a spike in body discoveries, not because there will be more murders all at once, but rather because of the HSK, which gathers and compiles data on active serial killers. Other databases were either difficult or time-consuming for authorities to enter and/or retrieve data from, and there were no laws requiring universal reporting procedures, etc. But most importantly, earlier databases concentrated on offenders, signatures, and other information that isn't usually pertinent to highway killings, while HSK concentrates on geography, kidnapping, body disposal sites, etc. As the database expands, it will become exponentially faster and more effective. But, like any database, there could be a tipping point, so there might be spikes in finds rather than a constant rise. If that makes you feel better, I would stop at the car to assist Jesus Christ himself. Please understand, JC. I reported the nearest populous location, and not only reported it, but also raised hell until I saw police officers in action. I have spoken with dozens of Texans along that road, and a follow-up is necessary because it doesn't always occur. Though not all police officers feel that way, a sizable portion of them indicated indifference about the situation or thought the killers were doing them a favor. I have worked with some of them, though, and I can tell you that their attitude is essentially that they are predominantly drug users. A Texas state trooper informed me. That point blank saves us the paperwork, so I don't care. To be sure, not all American neighborhoods do not harbor serial killers, and you won't find a nuclear engineer on every corner, unless you're hanging out at MIT. By this, I mean pulling off on the highway where they are focused, and certainly not all, not even the majority of truckers are serial killers. Of course, the profession is incredibly enticing to pedos, but there are many wonderful guys out there coaching minor league. Furthermore, I'm positive that those diligent truckers out there observe how America handles Harley truck drivers. I'm glad that these criminals have been apprehended and removed from their roadways. Much worse than the U.S., Mexico does a poor attempt to deal with their serial murderer issue. A retired Texas Ranger I spoke with expressed his suspicions. By passing off their murders as hotel hits, traditional serial killers are causing an increase in American visitors to Mexico, committing crimes and maybe killing people, while American predators prowl there because of the inadequate reporting and the fact that poverty drives many women to engage in criminal activity, including driving, and hence serves as a breeding ground for predators.